Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever felt like reading an academic paper is, I don't know, trying to untangle a massive knot of information, believe me, you are not alone. But today, we're going to cut right through that knot. By the end of this session, you'll be empowered to instantly identify when authors are contextualizing a problem, proposing a fix, and critically evaluating whether those solutions actually work in the real world.
Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The academic blueprint. 2. Spotting the problem. 3. Identifying the solution. 4. The art of evaluation. 5. Block versus integrated structures. And 6. Reading like a critic.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the academic blueprint. To really grasp academic writing, we first have to understand the main goal of the writer. So, how do academics solve the world's dilemmas? Well, academic texts, they don't just sit there stating isolated facts. I mean, they aren't encyclopedias, right? Instead, they actively contextualize real-world issues and critically evaluate potential fixes. They're literally trying to solve the world's dilemmas, one paper at a time.
And they do this using a very specific formula known as the problem-solution pattern. It's exactly what it sounds like, a structure where a problem is identified and one or more possible solutions are reported and evaluated. This framework is an essential building block you'll encounter across almost every discipline. Spotting this pattern early, it gives you a massive advantage. It's kind of like having the architectural blueprints handed to you before you even walk into a building. You know exactly where the author's going to take you next.
Moving on to Section 2, Spotting the Problem.
Here's where it gets fun. Specific vocabulary acts as your detective clues. You see, when you're reading, you aren't just looking for generic complaints. Academic writers use highly specific nouns and verbs. You want to listen for the language of a problem, words like dilemma, threat, burden, crisis, or shortage. When an author drops the word dilemma, instead of just saying, a bad thing, they're planting a massive signpost telling you, hey, here's the issue we need to fix.
And they don't just state the problem, they contextualize it. They tell you why it matters. For instance, authors might frame the digital divide not just as a technology gap, but as a modern inequality. Or they might describe increasing energy consumption as placing a dangerous burden on resources, or say GM foods present potential environmental risks. The absolute second you spot these carefully chosen words, you know a problem has been formally established and contextualized.
Which brings us to Section 3, Identifying the Solution.
Okay, so once the problem is clearly established and contextualized, the author isn't just going to leave you hanging. They pivot. And the crucial thing to listen for here are collocations. If you're not familiar, collocations are basically just specific expected pairings of words that naturally go together. Notice how solution verbs pair up with problem nouns. We address the issue, we mitigate the impact, or we overcome the setback. Seeing these pairings means the author is confidently signaling that a proposed fix is on the table. They're moving us right from the what is wrong stage to the how do we fix it stage.
Next up, Section 4, the art of evaluation.
But look, just proposing a fix, that isn't enough in the academic world. Anybody can pitch an idea. We need to evaluate it. And honestly, this is the most critical step in academic discourse. I absolutely love this quote from our source material. Evaluation is essentially subjective, but generally based on evidence. That perfectly captures it, right? It brilliantly illustrates that while academic writing leans heavily on hard data, statistics, and research, it still fundamentally relies on the author's distinct voice and subjective judgment. They have to decide if a solution is workable, cost-effective, or just completely impractical, and they have to convince you that their judgment is sound.
And how an author expresses that judgment tells you so much. Take a look at the difference here between confident evaluation and tentative evaluation, which, by the way, is often called hedging. Confident language says, the data shows that interventions were not sufficient. Boom. It leaves no room for doubt. But academic writers often prefer the tentative approach to, protect themselves from counter-criticism. They'll use hedging, saying something like, the data suggests interventions might be relatively ineffective. Words like suggests, might be, or relatively, they totally soften the stance. Recognizing this hedging language is absolutely crucial to understanding exactly how strongly an author believes in a given solution.
All right, Section 5, Block versus Integrated Structures. Now that we've got the language down, let's look at how these arguments are physically built on the page. There are two primary blueprints for essay layout. In an integrated structure, an author presents a problem, offers a solution, and then immediately evaluates that one solution before moving on to the next. On the flip side, the block structure groups all the possible solutions together in one big block and then evaluates all of them together later on. Depending on how complex the topic is, an author will choose the structure that makes their argument clearest for you.
Let's zoom in on the integrated flow for a second, because it's incredibly common in academic texts. You can see how it builds step by step. First, you get the statement of the problem. Then, solution 1 is proposed. Right after that, immediately, you get the evaluation of solution 1. Is it too expensive? Is it highly likely to work? Then the author introduces solution 2, followed directly by the evaluation of solution 2. This structure is a real game changer when an author wants to meticulously unpack complex, diverse solutions one at a time so the reader doesn't lose track of the whole shebang.
And finally, Section 6, Reading like a Critic. So we've got the language, we've got the structure, and we understand evaluation. Let's pull this all together so you can truly step into the shoes of a critical reader. As a focused learner, you shouldn't just absorb information passively. When you see a solution proposed on the page, you've got to ask critical questions. Will this solution actually work in practice? How expensive or feasible is it, really? Is the author basing their evaluation on strong, reliable evidence or just personal opinion? And finally, look at their word choices. Is the author using confident language or are they hiding behind tentative hedging? Asking these questions is how you gauge both the author's true stance and the validity of their entire argument.
Which brings us to our final takeaway. We learned earlier that at its core, evaluation is subjective. Sure, it's based on evidence, but it is ultimately the author's judgment. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. If all evaluations are essentially subjective, how does that change the way you read so-called objective academic texts? Next time you read a paper, don't just hunt for the facts. Look for the framework. Find the problem, identify the solution, and ask yourself, whose subjective voice is truly shaping the solutions of tomorrow? Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer, and happy reading.